Hello, my name is Daniel Boettcher, and welcome to the second episode of my podcast, Shine. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Graham Boettcher. Dr. Boettcher, or as he's known to me, Cousin, is a passionate art historian and the director of the Birmingham Museum of Art. Graham has spent years creating and curating spaces for others, but it's his own personal journey today that I find to be the most remarkable. In this episode, Graham opens up about his transformation, breaking down the walls he built around himself, and sharing with us how he found the courage to live openly and authentically. I encourage you to sit back and listen in as Graham shares his journey from self-doubt to self-acceptance. I was in your house this morning, and it's full of stuff, neat stuff. Can you tell me a little bit about the stuff you collect?
Oh, we could be here for hours. I am a born collector. I come from a long line of collectors. And I've been collecting seriously since I was 5 years old. One of my first collections consisted of German nutcrackers, and only German nutcrackers. I had a kind of rigid parameters around my collections from a young age. So people would try to give me nutcrackers that were not by Steinbach or Hans Christian Ulbrich, and they didn't belong in my collection. So I've collected coins, stamps, antique bubble pipes, vintage Christmas tree light bulbs. I currently am collecting cast iron pigs that advertise pig iron in Birmingham, and I buy every one I can find. I think lately, though, I still have a lot of collections, but I've gotten more into what I call catch and release collecting. Because I do realize that I'm starting to run out of room. I also don't have any direct heirs. And so I'm starting to think about, these collections that I've put together, where will they live when I'm gone? And so one of my most recent collections for the past several years, I have been buying letters written by famous artists on eBay and donating them to the Archives of American Art at the Smithsonian. And they have created the Graham C. Boettcher collection of artist letters, which I can add to for the rest of my life. And it is fun because I have the thrill of the hunt. I have the thrill of owning it ever so briefly. And then I turn around and give it usually within the year or a little more than a year to the Smithsonian. And it's been a lot of fun.
I want to express to the listeners that I'm sitting here with a man who's got a really good eye and a really fine ability to take something that seems impossible and esoteric and arrange it for a viewer to create some meaning and help us understand, because ultimately you're a historian, right?
That's right. I'm an art historian, but where I was trained at Yale, they make a point of saying that it is the history of art department, not the art history department. Most other universities, it's art history. It was that way at the University of Washington when I did my master's. But at Yale, they put the history first because they want to make it clear that they're training us as historians first and foremost.
Before we got to Yale, where did you grow up, Graham?
I grew up in the Skagit Valley in Washington State, south of Bellingham, north of Seattle, small farming community at the time. It's grown tremendously since I was a child. And I grew up out in the country on a farm that had been in the Boetcher family. My father and mother bought it from my great aunt and uncle. And so it was a nice place to grow up, surrounded by woods, and you could see the Cascade Mountains in the distance, and a lovely place to live.
Graham and I actually were graduate students at Yale together in different departments, which is where we met. But the interesting thing and the purpose of this podcast is I'm liking to talk to people who are like Graham. And Graham, on paper, from the surface, is a remarkable human being. And he's running a large art museum beautifully. But all of us have problems that are outside of our work spheres that we have needed to solve. And I'm hoping that the listener, you, can start to get a window into some people who look really good, who actually have had to wrestle with their own problems. Would you like to introduce that, Graham?
Yeah, I mean, it's in a way two problems that are really one, or one problem that was masking something, which is to say, my entire life I have struggled with my weight, but in my late 20s, I realized that I was building my own closet out of fat and flesh so that I would not have to reckon with my sexuality as a now openly gay and proud man. I went on my first physician-prescribed diet when I was in third grade. Was taken to a nutritionist, put on a diet, and I grew up in a household where there was a culture of dieting, and so there was constant talk of dieting and weight loss. And I remember there were years when I was rail thin and years when I was twice the size as the previous year. Mm-hmm. And it was a constant struggle and a constant yo-yoing. And it was a source of constant focus, but also a source of constant frustration. I made certain attempts in college as an undergrad to lose the weight, but there was a point when, I think it was after I graduated undergrad, I was living in Germany for a year, and I wasn't eating particularly healthily. I was eating doner kebabs and gummy bears and probably drinking too much German beer. And so my weight at a point went progressively higher and higher. And so by the time I arrived back at Yale to start my doctorate in 1999, I was at my highest weight, which was, I got up to 445 pounds. My first year back in grad school, we were going to a potluck hosted by the chairman of the History of Art department. And one of my classmates offered to drive, and she had a tiny little sports car. I physically could not fit in her car. Right. And so fortunately, another car hadn't left yet. It was mortifying. And it also led to other behaviors. I was concurrently grappling with pretty crippling OCD, where I became obsessed with locking my door. And I would worry that my door wasn't locked, and I would go back time and time again. I broke the door handle on two of my cars over the years because I checked the door so many times to make sure it was locked. But that was because I was looking for something to control when I felt out of control.
So we're talking about a highly intelligent, intellectual young boy, who is collecting nutcrackers, which is beautiful, but at the time certainly didn't make you fit in, who's got a body that's, larger than all of your peers. You're not fitting in because your brain works a little different. You're not fitting in because your body works a little different. But there's a third aspect you mentioned here, which is your heart was leading you in a direction that was also different.
From a very young age, I think the earliest memory when I was going through puberty and started to become aware of my sexuality, I knew very early on that I was gay, that my attractions were for other guys. Yeah. And that didn't fit with the plan I had set out for myself, because I'm going to be the president. I'm going to be a brain surgeon. I'm going to be, all these things that I thought were important and markers of success. It was almost like a life plan that was like a stereotype, like the picket fence, the wife, the two kids, the great career. I didn't really know any better. Like, these might not actually be things that make me happy. This is some idealized notion of what my life should be, based on popular culture.
And so, to use your own words, maybe to distill the idea here a little bit, because you couldn't follow the prescription, you made it impossible to follow the prescription.
Right.
And the words you used were fat and flesh.
Yeah.
And you enveloped yourself.
I absolutely did. And I think when it comes to, an individual's sexuality, everyone goes down a different path. Some people lead a double life and then eventually come to the realization that they can only sustain one life, not a double life. I didn't lead a double life. I shut myself off. I knew I couldn't achieve this idealized life that I thought I needed to have, but I also knew that I couldn't lie to another person and be deceptive and pretend. I suppose, on one level I was trying to present as straight, but maybe not trying too hard. But when it came to other individuals, I couldn't go through the motions to pretend that I had an interest when I knew in my heart I did not.
So you eventually made a body that was not sexual in any way.
Yeah, I would say that's totally accurate. I made my own closet. And I stayed in that closet, and that closet was constructed of fat and flesh. I could feel myself dying, and I remember the feeling. Might get a little emotional talking about this because I remember it very well, and it was something that was predicted by my childhood pediatrician. Saw me until I was 21 years old. And he said, once you're 21, once you can have a drink, you're out of my care. That's it. But he saw me from, my earliest childhood memories all the way until I was 21. In my last visit, he said, Graham, I implore you, you have to get your weight under control. You're not going to make it to 30 if you don't. That's a pretty grim thing to hear when you're 21 and you think you're invincible.
Yeah, that's terrifying.
It's terrifying. And so I put it aside. I didn't take it seriously. I thought, yeah, I'm fat, but I know how to lose weight and I'll lose the weight. And there was a point where I still was optimistic. But then as the years progressed from 21 to 29, I started to realize, oh crap, Dr. Heisinger was right.
Oh.
Not only was I dying physically, every day there was some physical pain or discomfort. I had horrible acid reflux. I had crippling IBS that, where I could barely walk home from campus. I was diagnosed with borderline high blood pressure. My left ventricle of my heart was enlarged, which is typically something you see in runners and people who are morbidly obese. So there was all of that. There was the physical death that was occurring, the slow death, but then there was also the emotional and spiritual death. My interior life was in shambles because I had never known what it was like to be physically held or kissed by someone. It was the day before my 29th birthday. And one of my very best friends from childhood, who was my junior prom date, she's now a successful cardiologist living in Seattle, and we remained very close. And Rachel was visiting Yale because she was looking at fellowship programs. And I was living off campus with a dear friend who was a classmate as an undergrad and who was in my a cappella group, who was living life as an openly gay man. And they both knew because they knew me so well. They knew that I was gay because I think at different points over the years, I tried to poke my head out of the closet and to come out, but then I was always retreat back inside my shell. I remember we went to dinner at Maury's, very traditional restaurant right in the midst
Famously
of
Yale.
Yeah, which is where we had our first lunch together.
Exactly.
And we had a pre-birthday dinner, and it was a very serious conversation. It was anything but celebratory. It was, intervention might not be too strong a word. It was two people that cared deeply for me, expressing the gravest concern about my health, my mental health, my inability to be my authentic self openly. I think that coming from two people who I really care about and whose opinions and counsel I valued, coupled with the fact that I was turning 29, which is 1 year away from 30, which is the game over date that my childhood pediatrician communicated. The confluence of those things, they all hit me at once. And so we went home, I went to bed. The next morning, I called my mother. I said, "Mom, I'm gay." She said, "No, you're not." She said, "You're fat, and fat holds estrogen." I'm like, "Mom, I've been thin so many times over the past years." And I said, "I've always felt the same way. So it has nothing to do with whether I'm fat or thin, my feeling about men." And she said, "Well, have you ever been with a man?" And I said, "No, but I've never driven a Maserati either, and I know I'd like to." And so she said, "Well, we'll discuss this when you get home." And so we did discuss it when I got home, and she was, I'm happy to say, very supportive. And I never really faced any adversity within my own family, which I'm really proud of them for. But also at the same time, it's a little bittersweet because I'm like, why didn't I do this sooner? After hanging up the phone with my mom, I walked over to the Yale Health Plan. I made an appointment with a nutritionist, an endocrinologist, my primary care provider, and a psychiatrist. And a year later, I was 100 pounds lighter. I've had an incredible support system, especially the nutritionist who stayed with me that whole journey through Yale. I think at one point she said, "I'm probably not supposed to keep seeing you because you have no weight left to lose," but she said, "I care about you and I want to keep checking in on you." And she gave me a graduation present, and it meant a lot to know that she was always there for me. And I had a great team behind me that was invested in seeing me make this transformation. But I think I was finally invested in myself. So I've dated a lot since then. I've been with my current boyfriend for a little over 2 years now, and
the weight's off.
The weight is off. I mean, being perfectly honest, it will always be a struggle. I have to be very diligent about what I eat. I have good mechanisms to try to keep a handle on it, but I also know that when I am stressed out, I can easily revert to old habits, and I try to be mindful of that and catch myself when I'm stressed, and try to make better choices about what I'm eating.
If you could say anything to all of those people who have been worried about you over your life, what would you say to them today?
Thank you. I think there were times when I probably didn't understand where people were coming from, that I viewed their input as nagging or intrusive. But looking back, and once I reached the point where I really understood the consequences of what I was dealing with, that the consequences very easily could have been no more Graham. And I think any feelings that I might have had about it, that were negative, have shifted to gratitude.
That's wonderful.
So, how has solving this problem helped you understand Graham's spot in the world?
Well, a couple different ways. I think the experience of what I've gone through has helped me connect better with people. I think that's one of the things that I'd like to think that I'm successful as the director of this institution. And one of the things that I think helps me the most in my job is my ability to connect with many different types of people. And that's something that I even had in high school, because I could move between cliques seamlessly. I could sit with the drama, club kids. I could sit with the debate kids. I could sit with the football team, and often did. And I could hang out with absolutely anybody. And I think even though I was, closing off one part of my life and building this closet, I still naturally enjoy connecting with people, and I wasn't able to connect with people intimately. Mm-hmm. So I made sure that I became very good at connecting with people socially.
Right.
I think personally, it's made me more immediately responsive to issues when they arise. It is very rare anymore when it's something that concerns my health that I sit on it or kick the can down the road, because I saw what that nearly cost me.
Well, Graham, thank you for the conversation. Thanks for being so vulnerable.
My pleasure.
Graham, I love you, and I love to hear you shine.
Thank you, Dan. I love you too.
What a deeply moving story. Listening to how Graham changed his life and changed his way of living in order so in fact he could become his most authentic self. To hear him speak about losing an intensely large amount of weight and also at the same time becoming liberated in his approach to his sexuality is really touching, and I love to hear Graham grow that way. Now, the jewelry I make doesn't start at a jeweler's bench or by looking at the raw materials. In fact, the jewelry I make starts with a conversation, and it starts with a design brief that I've distilled out of that conversation. You can read or listen to me reading the full design brief, along with seeing images of the drawings, the renderings, and the final pieces of jewelry for the conversation that I've had with Graham on my website. The design brief that I've written for Graham is titled The Closet of Emergence, a deep dive into personal transformation. I'm really looking forward to our next episode, where I'll be talking to my old friend, Christian Ford. Now, Christian has had a career that is as widely varied as being a public school athlete in Northern California mountains, to being a Navy SEAL, to being an academic, and today he's a lawyer in private practice. And Christian talks about the process of knowing when it's time to move to the next thing. And hearing Christian describe how his life has pivoted so substantially in certain times, and what he's chosen to leave behind and what he chooses to take along each time, is really an interesting and meaningful conversation. Last but not least, if you've enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to the podcast and share it with someone who might like to hear Graham's story. You can go visit our website for more behind-the-scenes content at theintrepidwendell.com/shine. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing a part of your time with me. My name is Daniel Boettcher, and I love to hear you shine.